The golden numbers shine. The years have passed, life's mellowed to the acme of its time.
There are moments in Hollywood history that feel like the curtain finally getting pulled back, not by a tabloid, not by a scandal sheet, but by someone who was actually there. Someone who sat across from the legend, shared the spotlight, and knew the difference between the performance and the person. Buddy Hackett was that someone. And what he had to say about Johnny Carson wasn't cruel, wasn't bitter, and wasn't the product of jealousy. It was something far more interesting than all of that. It was the truth, delivered the only way Buddy Hackett knew how, with honesty, warmth, and a comedic instinct so sharp it could cut right through the most carefully constructed public image in the history of American television. To understand why Buddy's words carried so much weight, you first have to understand who he was and what he represented in the world of comedy. Leonard Hacker, the kid from Borough Park, Brooklyn, didn't arrive in Hollywood through privilege or connections. He arrived through sheer, relentless grind. He performed at Borscht Belt resorts in the Catskill Mountains as a tumbler, a high-energy entertainer whose entire job was to keep strangers laughing from sunup to well past sundown. His very first professional comedy performance was, by his own admission, a complete disaster. Not a single laugh. Not even a petty chuckle. Most people would have walked off that stage and found something else to do with their lives. Buddy Hackett went back and did it again. That kind of resilience shapes a person. It builds in them a particular kind of clarity, a no-nonsense ability to see past pretense and call things exactly as they are. By the time Buddy became a household name, appearing on the biggest television variety programs in America, charming audiences on Broadway, and eventually lending his unmistakable raspy voice to beloved animated films, he had earned the right to speak plainly. And when it came to Johnny Carson, plain speaking was exactly what was needed, because the gap between who Carson appeared to be and who Carson actually was happened to be one of the most carefully guarded secrets in show business. On television, Johnny Carson was everything America wanted in a late-night host. He was smooth without being slippery, funny without being threatening, and comfortable in a way that made every living room in the country feel like an extension of his Burbank studio. He had perfected the art of the casual conversation, the perfectly timed pause, the knowing look that said he was in on the joke right along with the audience. Millions of Americans went to bed every night feeling like they personally knew this man. That was the magic of Johnny Carson. But as Buddy Hackett came to understand over the course of decades and more than 70 appearances on that famous stage, the man behind the magic was someone entirely different. What Buddy eventually revealed, not all at once, not in a single dramatic expose, but across years of interviews, late-night appearances, and candid conversations, was that Johnny Carson was one of the most profoundly private and emotionally guarded human beings he had ever encountered in his life. And Buddy Hackett had encountered a great many human beings. He had shared rooming houses with Lenny Bruce. He had performed for wartime crowds during his 3 years of Army service in World War II. He had navigated Hollywood studios, Las Vegas casino floors, Broadway dressing rooms, and network television backlots. He was not a naive man. He was not easily impressed or easily fooled. So when Buddy said that you never truly knew Johnny Carson, that observation came from a place of genuine experience and not a hint of exaggeration. The structure of their relationship was revealing in itself. On camera, the chemistry between Buddy and Johnny appeared completely effortless. Buddy would launch into one of his legendary long-form stories, the kind that wandered and circled and seemed to be going absolutely nowhere before arriving at a punchline so perfectly constructed that Carson would be doubled over, genuinely helpless with laughter. Ed McMahon would be losing it right alongside him. The audience would be roaring. And in those moments, watching from home, you would have sworn that these two men were the closest of friends, the kind of guys who probably spent their weekends fishing together or swapping stories over dinner. But the moment the cameras stopped rolling, Buddy was clear about what actually happened. The warmth evaporated. The wall went back up. Carson was pleasant enough in the technical sense, but the connection, the real human connection that those televised evenings seemed to promise, simply was not there. Buddy described Carson as a man who had associates in the industry rather than genuine friends. The distinction matters enormously. Associates are people you work with, people you need, people whose presence in your professional orbit serves a function. Friends are people who know you, people you let in. By all accounts, Carson let very few people in, and even those he appeared to welcome into his inner circle often discovered that access came with conditions, could be revoked without warning, and was never quite as unconditional as it felt in the good times. This was not conjecture on Buddy's part. This was something he had observed firsthand, confirmed by watching what happened to others who thought they had earned a permanent place in Carson's world. The most instructive example in this regard involved Joan Rivers. For years, Joan was the closest thing Carson had to a protege. She was his go-to guest host, his favorite comedic sparring partner, someone he had championed publicly and supported professionally. Their on-screen rapport was genuine and electric, and the audience sensed it. Then in 1986, Joan accepted an offer to host her own late-night program on the Fox network. From any reasonable outside perspective, this was simply a comedian following the natural arc of her career, seeking her own platform after years of helping to build someone else's. Carson did not see it that way. He felt personally betrayed, and the response was immediate and total. He cut Joan Rivers out of his life completely, never spoke to her again, and made certain she would not return to The Tonight Show for the remainder of his tenure. Joan Rivers, who had considered Carson a genuine friend, spent years processing that rejection. The coldness of it never stopped surprising her. But he watched all of this and understood something important. Carson's emotional landscape operated on loyalty as a form of ownership. Those who served his world faithfully and on his terms were rewarded with proximity to the most powerful platform in American entertainment. Those who asserted their own independence in ways that Carson interpreted as betrayal were frozen out with a thoroughness that left no room for reconciliation. But he survived and thrived in that environment because he was smart enough to understand the unspoken rules of the game. He was unpredictable and explosive on camera in ways that were ratings gold, but he was always careful to make sure the show remained Carson's show. That was the line. Cross it and you were done. Respect it and you had a home on that couch for as long as you wanted one. But respecting that line came with its own complicated emotional cost. And this is where Buddy's analysis of Carson became most insightful and most compassionate. Because Buddy Hackett, for all his irreverence and his unfiltered personality, was a man with genuine emotional intelligence. He looked at Johnny Carson and he did not see a villain. He saw a tragedy. He saw a man of extraordinary talent and extraordinary discipline who had poured every ounce of warmth, spontaneity, and genuine feeling he possessed into a television performance, and had almost nothing left over for the people standing right in front of him. Carson gave America everything. The people in his actual life got the remainder, which was frequently very little. There is something deeply poignant about that picture, and Buddy seemed to feel the poignancy of it even as he was being clear-eyed about the reality of it. The drinking, the volatile moods, the marriages that ended, the feuds that calcified into permanent estrangements. These were not the marks of a man who was simply difficult or selfish. They were the marks of someone who had fundamentally miscalculated where his emotional resources were going, and who never quite found a way to correct that miscalculation. By the time Carson retired in 1992, he withdrew from public life almost entirely, living out his final years in Malibu with a quietness that felt less like peace and more like a man who had used up what he had to give and was now sitting in the echo of it. Buddy Hackett, by contrast, spent those same years leaning more deeply into the people around him. He and his wife Sherry, the Brooklyn dance teacher he had fallen in love with back in the Catskills, built a life together that was as far from the cool detachment of Carson's world as you could imagine. They founded an animal sanctuary in California's San Fernando Valley. Buddy mentored younger comedians with genuine generosity. He brought his son Sandy into his professional world not as a business arrangement, but as a genuine act of love and legacy building. He was, by every account from those who actually knew him, the same person offstage that he appeared to be on stage. Loud, warm, big-hearted, and completely incapable of pretending to feel something he didn't or hiding something he did. That fundamental difference in character is what made Buddy's observations about Carson so credible and so valuable. Two men, both giants of the same era, both fixtures on the same stage, both beloved by the same audiences, and yet they had chosen completely different ways of moving through the world. One kept everyone at arm's length and controlled his image with an iron grip. The other let everyone in and let the chips fall where they may. One was Carson. One was Hackett. And the one who came forward to tell us the truth about the other was the one who had nothing to gain from it and no image left to protect. Buddy Hackett passed away on June 30th, 2003, at his home in Malibu, at the age of 78. He had lived with heart disease for years and had refused bypass surgery with the same stubbornness that had characterized every other decision in his life. He died as he had lived, on his own terms, surrounded by the people he loved, and having said everything he had to say without apology or revision. What he left behind was not just a catalog of performances, films, and comedy albums. He left behind a portrait of an era, and within that portrait, a quietly devastating truth about what it costs to be the most beloved face on American television while keeping the actual self completely hidden from view. But he never said it to be cruel. He said it because it was true, because he had seen it up close, and because he believed that honesty, even when it was uncomfortable, was always worth more than a comfortable silence. That was Buddy Hackett. And in the end, what he revealed about Johnny Carson told us just as much about Buddy himself, about the kind of man he was, the kind of life he chose, and why, decades after